If you just joined us, welcome to the South African Morning. Local government elections will go ahead this year, but no later than the 1st of November. The Constitutional Court has dismissed the IEC's application to postpone the poll, and former Deputy Chief Justice Dikgang Moseneke advised the IEC not to hold elections due to COVID-19. Now, he found free and fair polls could not be held amid this pandemic. Now, let's discuss this with Dawie Scholtz, an independent election analyst from Boston Consulting Group. Good morning, Dawie.
Good morning, guys.
Dawie, let's get to this very first question. The implications of the Constitutional Court's decision, what are they?
I think it's enormously uncertain right now. So obviously, the one thing that's very clear, and it's very good to have clarity on that, is that the election is now going ahead in that 4-day window sometime between the 27th of October and the 1st of November. So that we definitely know is happening, and it's good to know that. The one other point which I think is likely but not entirely certain is whether there will be another registration weekend, right? So we know that voters did not have an opportunity to go register or change their registrations earlier this year because of COVID disruption. And the court has now ordered the IEC to try to have a registration weekend if practically possible. So I think the IEC will try to do that, and they will announce on Monday whether there will be a registration weekend or not. So that's, I think, another thing that's relatively certain, but we'll see. But then the really, really big question mark about the ruling from yesterday is, and the spectre that really hangs over this right now, is whether the ANC will have another window to submit candidates. We know that they, for large portions of the country, missed submitting candidates, and it would, if not changed, would have a very significant impact on the outcome of this election. And the judgment is, I actually think, quite uncertain about that. I've spoken to maybe 5 to 10 different lawyers. About half of them say that the ANC will not get another window to submit candidates. About half of them say they will. So I think the IEC will provide clarity on that on Monday, apparently. But I think that is the key uncertainty at this stage.
But of course, there is much speculation because they did withdraw their application to the Electoral Court to actually have to extend the candidates list or the registration of the candidates list. Do you think that, they might know something that the rest of us don't with the Electoral Court's decision?
Honestly, I wouldn't speculate about that. I have no idea. I have no information about that. But the one thing which is just very clear is that the IEC will have to clarify the kind of what this decision by the Constitutional Court means now, because it will have honestly an enormous impact on the election either way, right? I mean, the one excellent example, for example, is in KwaZulu-Natal. The ANC didn't submit any PR candidates for, I think, all of the municipalities in the province other than 3. And, electorally, that means the ANC isn't eligible for half the seats in KwaZulu-Natal. So it would basically automatically mean that they lose their majority in every municipality in KwaZulu-Natal except for 3, which, is enormous. A similar example is in the Western Cape, where they didn't submit any proportional candidates either, which means that, the theoretical maximum mathematically for the ANC in any municipality in the Western Cape is something like 15 to 20%. So it's impossible for them to win any municipalities in the Western Cape if they're not allowed to submit candidates. And then, of course, there's many other places, like, for example, the city of Tshwane, where they, failed to submit, I think, 13 candidates from the data that I saw. And the wards that we know they're from are strong ANC wards. So it would imply sort of the ANC losing 4 to 5% of the vote automatically in a place like Tshwane, which is a very tight election. That's really significant. Those are very, very significant implications for the ANC.
And of course, also in the Western Cape, there's also been struggles there for the ANC. Did they manage to register any candidates in the Western Cape? I don't think they've actually managed to register at all, if I'm not mistaken.
No, so it's a little bit complicated, right? So in local government elections, obviously there are 2 kinds of candidates, right? And 2 lists of candidates. And you will also recall when you go vote in a local government election, you actually get 2 ballots, right? You get a ward ballot for your little area, and you get a PR ballot, right? And parties have to submit candidates for the ward, but they also have to submit candidates for the PR list. So and the number of seats is 50-50 between PR and ward, right? And the ANC submitted only ward candidates, and not even all of their ward candidates, but most of their ward candidates in the Western Cape. So they're eligible for about half of the seats in the Western Cape, but they submitted none PR candidates. So they're not eligible for half the seats in the Western Cape. And, if you look at just all of the wards in the Western Cape, probably in a very optimistic scenario for the ANC, they have a realistic shot of maybe winning 40% or half of the wards, right? So, if they're only eligible for half and they can only win half of half, it means they could get about 20 or 25% of the vote max in the Western Cape. So that's how serious these implications are.
But of course, if the Electoral Court decides in the favour of the ANC, they will be able to register the candidates. So it isn't all doom and gloom for the party. Just to clear that.
Yes, absolutely. So that's exactly the clarity that we need now. As I said, I think one should have two hypotheticals in your mind when you think about the selection at this stage. So there's a hypothetical where the ANC are not able to submit their candidates, which is the discussion we've just been having. But of course, there's the other scenario where they are able to submit their candidates, in which case we have a largely normal election with the ANC contesting at full force in all wards across the country. And I think then, the interesting thing about that scenario where the ANC are contesting everywhere is even that election is extremely uncertain. I've been observing elections now for a while in South Africa quite closely, and this must be one of the most uncertain elections that we've come across for quite a while. And there's a number of reasons for that. The first one is that we've just not had any polling this year, right? We've also had no recent by-election data to go off of because the by-elections have been a bit patchy this year due to COVID. And then we've got no electoral data post some really important events in South Africa, right? So we know the violent rioting and looting that took place earlier in this year, I'm certain would have had a significant impact on people's electoral preferences and the way they rate the parties that think about voting in this election. And we've just had no electoral data after that event. And we've also not had a lot of data about how voters are thinking about how COVID affects, their political allegiance. And the final thing is we've also not had any registrations this year. So, I was looking at the voters roll a couple of days ago, and there are today 1.1 million fewer voters in South Africa, registered voters, than there was in the last election because we haven't had a new chance for registration. So there's lots of young people who have not registered to vote. So I think significant potential for a low turnout election. We have very little electoral data, and of course we also have some new parties contesting like Action SA, where we have no data on how they'll perform. So it all put together is an extremely uncertain outcome, even if the ANC is contesting everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's wait and see, I think.
Yeah, Dawie, just a quick one there. Interesting that you mentioned all of those, the young people and people not registering to vote. I read a very interesting article about, or a paper rather, that said that a lot of people actually in South Africa, can't remember the percentage was, but it was in the majority, will not be upset if there's an unelected government as long as that government can provide them with housing and water, sanitation, all of these basic, services. But let's entertain this idea. Is that a possibility in South Africa?
I mean, I would absolutely, as a committed Democrat, I would certainly hope not. But I think it does point to a very important question about legitimacy and governance in South Africa, right? And how people perceive the legitimacy of government. For the last 4 or 5 elections, our turnout rates have just consistently gone down. So they've always been very high by global standards, and they still are high by global standards, but they're coming down all the time, right? So, for example, the national government election in 2014, right, had a turnout of, say, 73% of people went to go and vote, or registered voters. Our national government election in 2019, so the last one, the turnout rate was about 65%. So it came down a lot, right? And that does reduce the level of democratic participation. It means people are not motivated or not interested or not believe it matters enough for them to go vote. And I think there's a real risk that we could have a very, very low turnout election in this upcoming election because of COVID, because, the parties haven't really campaigned, maybe because of, the rioting and looting that's happened, maybe frustration with government, who knows. But there are some risks, I think, of a very low turnout election. And I think you raise a good point then. The legitimacy of our government is based on the fact that people actually participate in the democratic process. And it's not a good sign for South Africa if, we have fewer and fewer people registering to vote and also then not participating in the election, right? So my view is that it's critical that the IEC tries to have a registration weekend between now and the election, just to give people who are, 18, 19, 20, a chance to register to vote and actually participate in this election. And also, it just confers more legitimacy on the process if we've actually given people a chance to register to vote. Sorry, I know it's a long answer, but I'll just say just one more thing is, for these local government elections, it's also very important that you are registered where you live, right? Because you can't vote in a voting station where you don't live. So, and we haven't had a chance for people to go change their registration. So, and obviously, a lot of people have moved house, have moved where they live since 2019. So one could foresee if there's not a chance for people to go change their registrations, thousands of people rocking up at voting stations on the 27th of October or, between the 27th and the 1st of November. And the IEC saying, sorry, sir, thank you. We see that you are registered, but you're actually registered in Mpumalanga and not at this voting station. So you can't vote today, right? And that is also a real risk if you don't have a registration weekend.
Thank you so much, Dawie. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for. I actually have so many questions, regarding these upcoming elections. But unfortunately, that is all that we have time for. Chaos and, registrations not happening in time. It's just going to be very interesting to see what is going to unfold in the next few weeks to come when it comes to the municipal elections. And as Dawie now said as well, registration for voters is going to be quite interesting as well.